The wind did not simply blow through the Absaroka Mountains. It hunted. It searched for weakness. It slipped through seams in coats, crawled into cracked boots, and pressed cold fingers against a man's spirit until he either bent or broke. In the winter of 1887, that wind ruled the high country of Wyoming, and it was in that unforgiving land that a solitary mountain man stepped into a story that would change a valley forever. Caleb Mercer knew the wind well. At 38 years old, he had spent more than half his life in the mountains. He had chosen the quiet honesty of snow and stone over the noise and lies of towns. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the slow confidence of a man who feared little. His buckskin clothes were worn thin, his fur coat patched and heavy, and his beard carried streaks of frost even when he stood still. It was November 14th, 1887. The sky hung low and dark, the color of a deep bruise. Old-timers would later say that storms like this only came once in a generation. Caleb was tracking a wounded elk, following faint drops of blood across hard-packed snow. His breath rose thick and white in the cold air as he moved silently through the trees. When he crested a narrow ridge, he stopped. Below him lay a box canyon known as Dead Man's Drop. Locals avoided it. The sun rarely touched its floor, and the cold settled there like a curse. That was when Caleb saw something that made his hand tighten around the stock of his rifle. Smoke. A thin gray line twisted upward against the dark pine trees. No one lived in Dead Man's Drop. What the last man who tried had frozen solid 3 years earlier. Caleb turned his back on the elk trail. Curiosity could get a man killed in the high country, but instinct kept him alive. He strapped on his snowshoes and moved downhill, slow and careful. As he drew closer, the source of the smoke came into view. It was not a proper cabin. It looked like a pile of driftwood barely holding itself together. The roof sagged in the middle. Gaps between the logs gaped wide enough to see daylight through. The door hung crooked on a single leather hinge. Caleb crouched behind a boulder and pulled a small brass spyglass from his pack. He raised it, expecting to see a drifter or an outlaw. Instead, he saw a woman. She was small and thin, wrapped in layers of torn wool and rags. She struggled in the snow, swinging an axe far too heavy for her arms. Each swing looked painful. When the blade bounced uselessly off a frozen log, she dropped to her knees and buried her face in her hands. Caleb lowered the glass. This was wrong. A woman alone, 20 miles from the nearest settlement, with a storm coming that could bury a house by morning. He watched for a long time, waiting to see if anyone else appeared. No one did. The smoke from the chimney was weak and pale. She was burning green wood. Either she did not know better, or she had nothing else left. The wind began to scream, high and sharp, the sound that always came before heavy snow. Caleb had rules. He stayed out of other people's lives. He had left the world of men because it was full of greed and cruelty. But leaving someone to freeze was not part of his code. He stood, slung his rifle over his shoulder, and walked downhill toward the cabin. That single choice ended his life as a ghost and began something far more dangerous. He did not sneak up. Surprising a desperate person could get you killed. He walked heavy through the snow and called out, "Hello, the house!" The woman spun around, eyes wide with fear. She dropped the wood and scrambled backward toward the door, fumbling inside her coat. "Stay back!" she screamed. Caleb stopped 10 yards away and raised his empty hands. "I ain't here to harm you. Storm's coming. A bad one." She pulled out a rusty revolver, her hands shaking so hard the barrel wobbled. "I have a gun." "I see that," Caleb said calmly. "But unless you got dry wood and meat in that shack, That gun won't stop the cold. The sky darkened fast. Snow began to fall sideways, driven hard by the wind. "Who sent you?" she demanded. "Did Halloway send you?" The name struck him hard. Jubal Halloway, the richest rancher in the territory, a man who owned land, lawmen, and silence. "I don't ride for Halloway," Caleb said. "I don't ride for anyone." He reached slowly into his pack and pulled out a bundle of dried meat and pemmican. He tossed it gently into the snow at her feet. "Eat." Hunger won over fear. She grabbed the food and tore into it like someone who had not eaten in weeks. Caleb stepped 1 foot closer. "That roof won't hold. That door won't stop the wind. If I leave you here, you'll be dead by morning." She swallowed hard. "Why do you care?" "I don't," he lied. "But I won't walk past a grave I could have stopped." A gust ripped a shingle loose and sent it tumbling into the darkness. She looked at the cabin, and then back at the towering man in the snow. "I have nothing to pay you," she whispered. "I didn't ask for payment." She lowered the gun. Caleb walked past her and stepped inside the cabin. The smell hit him first. Old ash, damp wood, and fear. He turned back. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she said softly. "Sarah Jenkins." "All right, Sarah Jenkins," Caleb said, dropping his pack. "We got work to do." The storm trapped them for 3 days. Outside, the world vanished into white fury. Snow piled 6 feet high against the walls. The wind slammed the cabin like it wanted in. Inside, Caleb worked without rest. He shored up the roof with a fallen pine. He packed mud and snow into the gaps between logs. He cut leather from his own gear to fix the door. By nightfall, the fire roared. For the first time in weeks, the cabin held warmth, and they barely spoke. Sarah slept with the revolver under her hand. Caleb slept sitting up, his rifle across his lap. On the 3rd morning, the wind died. Silence settled heavy and strange. Caleb skinned a rabbit by the fire. Sarah sat nearby, color slowly returning to her face. "You said you don't ride for Halloway," she said. "I don't. He's looking for me." "I figured." She pulled a small leather journal from her boot. "I was his bookkeeper. I saw the ledgers. He pays men to burn out homesteaders, sheriffs, judges. I stole this and ran." Caleb looked at the book and understood immediately. "That's a death warrant." "It's the truth," she said. "Truth don't stop bullets." He stared out the window at the clearing sky. "Storm's broken. That means men will come." "Are you leaving?" she asked quietly. Caleb looked at her. Thin, but brave, still standing. "No," he said. "I'm done running." She swallowed. "Then what do we do?" Caleb's jaw tightened. "We turn this place into something that can fight back." He looked around the broken cabin and nodded once. "But first," he said, "we make sure winter doesn't kill us before men try." Winter settled into Dead Man's Drop with a crushing weight. The storm that had nearly killed Sarah was only the beginning. Snow no longer drifted softly. It hardened into ice and sealed the valley like a tomb. The sun appeared only as a pale glare above the canyon rim, never touching the ground where the cabin sat hidden. Caleb worked every day like a man racing time itself. He did not simply patch the cabin. He transformed it. He studied the way the wind moved, how it screamed down the canyon walls, and searched for gaps. And then he fought it with wood, snow, and stubborn will. He cut spruce boughs by the hundreds and showed Sarah how to weave them into thick mats. Together, they nailed them to the outside walls and packed snow over them. The cabin slowly disappeared under white layers, becoming part of the mountain itself. Inside, the air grew still and warmer. The biting cold loosened its grip. "Snow traps air," Caleb explained. "Air keeps us alive." Food came next. Caleb taught Sarah how to see the land the way animals did. He showed her broken branches, faint tracks, and places where rabbits always passed. She learned to set snares with wire pulled from rusted junk left behind by long-gone prospectors. They smoked meat over the fire, hanging thin strips from the rafters until the cabin smelled of wood smoke and survival. Caleb found an old iron stove buried under snow in a collapsed shed nearby. It took him half a day to drag it inside. He propped it with stones, fixed the pipe, and turned it into the heart of the cabin. He carved bowls and spoons from birch. He built shelves. He even made Sarah a pair of snowshoes from ash wood and rawhide. As the days passed, silence between them softened. Sarah proved sharp and capable. She rationed supplies carefully. She mended Caleb's torn coat with thread pulled from her own skirt. And she cleaned his rifle until it shone. One night, as the fire crackled low, Sarah broke the quiet. "You got family, Mercer." Caleb's knife paused mid-carve. "Had a wife, Mary, and a boy." Sarah looked up. "What happened?" "Winter sickness," he said flatly. "Took them both. I burned the house down and walked into the mountains." She reached out and rested her hand on his arm. "I'm sorry." "Pain just means you're still breathing," he said. But he did not pull away. Sarah told him about her father, how Holloway's men burned their homestead, how the law called it an accident, how she took the bookkeeping job to expose the truth, even if it killed her. Two wounded people, bound by loss, learning to survive together. Peace did not last. Late in December, Caleb was chopping wood when the forest went quiet. Birds vanished. Squirrels disappeared. His instincts screamed danger. A rifle shot shattered the silence. The bullet tore into the cabin doorframe, sending splinters flying. "Down!" Caleb shouted. Sarah hit the floor, clutching the revolver Caleb had taught her to clean. Caleb slid to the window slit and scanned the ridge. "High ground," he muttered. "Professional." More shots followed. 3 men appeared from the trees, confident and careless. "We know you're in there," one called out. "Mr. Holloway wants his property back." Caleb slipped out through the hidden rear tunnel. He moved like a shadow through snow and timber, circling wide. When he fired, the lead man fell screaming into the snow. The others panicked. They were not prepared for a hunter who knew every inch of the land. Caleb stepped into view, rifle steady. "You go back and tell Holloway something," he said coldly. "You come here again, I won't aim to wound." The men fled, dragging their injured companion behind them. Sarah stood shaking in the doorway when Caleb returned. "That wasn't the end," he said grimly. "That was a message." That night, Caleb lifted a loose floorboard and revealed a buried crate. Inside were sticks of old dynamite from his mining days. Sarah stared. "You planning a war?" Caleb nodded. "They already are." Over the next days, he turned the canyon itself into a weapon. He climbed the ridges and placed charges at weak points in the snowpack. He ran fuses through hidden paths, all leading to a single detonator near the cabin. "They'll come at dawn," Caleb said one night, staring at the moonlit snow. "Tobias Holloway will lead them." When morning came, a thunder echoed through the canyon. 40 riders filled the valley floor. Tobias rode at the front, smiling. "Send out the girl," Tobias called. "I'll let you live," Caleb answered with gunfire. The attack was brutal. Bullets shredded the cabin walls. Men advanced from all sides. The fire spread when torches hit the porch. "I have to reach the detonator," Caleb said. He ran. Gunfire tore the snow around him. A bullet grazed his leg. When he reached the rock, his heart dropped. The wire was cut. The charges were useless. Caleb looked up at the mountain, then back at the men closing in. He raised his rifle and aimed at the last remaining charge high on the cliff. He stepped into the open. "Look up!" he roared. He fired. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the mountain answered. The avalanche roared down, swallowing horses and men, and gunfire in a wall of white. Caleb dove into the tunnel as the world collapsed. Inside the buried cabin, darkness fell. The roof bowed but held. Silence followed, thick and terrifying. "Sarah," Caleb called. "I'm here," she answered. They were alive, buried, running out of air. Caleb stared at the stovepipe. "We dig up," he said, "or we die here." And in the crushing darkness beneath the mountain, the fight for survival began again. The silence after the avalanche was worse than the noise. It pressed against the cabin like a living thing. The wind was gone. The world outside no longer existed. Caleb lay on the dirt floor, his ears ringing, his chest burning as he dragged air into his lungs that already felt thin and heavy. "Sarah," he said again, louder this time. "I'm here," she answered from near the stove. Her voice shook, but it was steady enough to give him hope. Caleb struck a match. The small flame showed the truth of their situation. The cabin had shrunk. The roof sagged low in the center. Snow pressed through every crack, sealing them in. They were buried deep, maybe under 10 feet of packed ice and snow, maybe more. "Did we stop them?" Sarah asked. Caleb nodded. The mountain did. They had heat, barely. They had food for a short while. What they did not have was time. The air would turn against them long before hunger did. Sarah grabbed the shovel. "We dig." Caleb stopped her. "Not the door. If we open that, the snow pours in and crushes us." He looked up at the stovepipe. "That's our way out." For 2 days, they worked in darkness and sweat. They fed the fire with everything they could burn. Furniture, shelves, floorboards. Heat rose up the pipe, melting a narrow pocket in the snow above. Caleb climbed onto the table and stabbed upward with an iron poker, chipping ice inch by inch. The air grew foul. Sarah's breathing turned shallow. Caleb's vision narrowed. "Stay with me," he said, forcing himself to keep moving. On the second night, the poker struck something that shifted. A blast of cold air rushed down the pipe, stealing their breath and saving their lives. They cried then, both of them, gasping and laughing at the same time. Digging upward took another full day. Hands bled, muscles locked. Finally, the shovel broke through into blue sky. Caleb pulled himself out first, collapsing onto the avalanche debris. He reached back down and dragged Sarah into the light. Dead Man's Drop was gone. The canyon was filled in, flattened by snow, but trees were snapped like twigs. Of Tobias Halloway and his men, there was no sign, just a torn saddle blanket flapping from a broken pine. "They're gone," Sarah whispered. Caleb nodded. "Buried deep." They had won the fight, but survival was not finished. They had no horses, little food, and ruined clothing. South Pass City lay 40 miles away. "We walk," Sarah said simply. The journey became a legend of its own. They pushed through deep drifts, slept buried in pine needles, and shared warmth to keep from freezing. Wolves followed them one night, yellow eyes glowing in the dark. Caleb stayed awake, growling softly until the pack melted back into the trees. On the 4th day, Sarah collapsed. Her boots were worn through. Her feet were frozen. Caleb did not hesitate. He lifted her onto his back and carried her, mile after mile. But he spoke to her constantly, telling stories, keeping her awake. When they staggered into South Pass City, people stared as if ghosts had walked out of the mountains. A miner dropped his tools when he saw them. They were taken inside. The doctor worked through the night. Sarah survived. Caleb refused to sleep. He sent a message by telegraph. 2 days later, the law arrived. The ledger did the rest. Jubal Holloway was arrested. His empire collapsed under the weight of names and numbers Sarah had carried through hell. He died in prison years later, forgotten by the land he tried to own. Caleb and Sarah did not stay in town. They took the reward money and bought land in the Wind River Valley. They built a real home, one with light and strong walls, one meant for living, not hiding. They married in the spring, quietly, honestly. Years passed. Children were born. The mountains remained in the distance, respected, but no longer feared. Caleb grew old. Sarah grew wise. On his last winter night, as a storm rolled in, they sat together on the porch. "You ever think about that day?" Caleb asked. Sarah shook her head. "You were always going to look." Caleb smiled and closed his eyes. He died warm, safe, and loved. They are buried side by side. Simple stones. To no grand words, just proof that sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is stop walking past someone in the cold.